Okay, well, welcome back. For our final session this afternoon, we have three speakers, Mick Smith from Wildbanks, Chris Kent from Anglers Trust and Caroline Dawson from SUP. Mick's going to speak to us first. Mick Smith from Wildbanks Conservation has been working in conservation wildlife for over 22 years. He started out working in the North Wales Wildlife Trust and for Flintshire County Council as a countryside ranger. He then managed a river restoration project on the River Colne in Huddersfield. Mick now runs Wildbanks Conservation alongside his wife Claire, and today he'll be speaking about peatland and wetland restoration. Thanks, Mick.
Bobadar, everybody. Next. Okay. My name is Mick Smith. I'm from Wildbanks Conservation. We have been, my wife and I started the company 17 years ago this April. We deliver habitat conservation and restoration projects. We've worked all over the country for lots of different organisations, lots of different sites, and often we've worked for the same people again and again, so hopefully we must have been doing something right for that, so hopefully that qualifies me to talk today. I'm not used to speaking in public. I'm not going to be anywhere near as eloquent as all the brilliant speakers that we've had today, but I will do my best, so please forgive me. I'm much more accustomed to having a chainsaw or a digger at hand than this. So I'm going to talk about peatland restoration and wetland restoration, and more specifically the peatland restoration, talking about raised bogs. The techniques that I'm going to go through, I'm going to talk about it from a contractor's point of view as opposed to from a project officer's type of point of view. So physically delivering them on the ground and some of the benefits, some of the problems that we've had that potentially some of you as project officers and staff on that side of the project may well not have come across. So raised bogs, generally what we're asked to do is to come on and try and sort the hydrology out. Generally, peatlands have been drained for decades, centuries in certain cases, and a large aspect of the works that we're delivering is to keep the water on site. The water is being taken off site for all sorts of reasons, and getting the hydrology right is one of the key things of peatland restoration. How do we go about doing that? We've got multiple options. These are the three that I'm just going to touch on today. We are installing plastic pilings to block drains, blocking underground pipe networks, and also installing peat bunding. So quickly, this is plastic pilings. So they are relatively easy to install. You need a big hammer and a spade. So plastic pilings, they come in a couple of different profiles, from a person who's hitting them with a big hammer. These designs, this profile, which is a half a hexagon-ish profile, as opposed to the Z profile, are much easier to install. These are installed, they have when they connect together, they have a ball and socket type joint. And when you're putting them in, they don't pull out quite as easily as the other design, which is a sort of an S that just hook in like that. They pull apart much easier than the ball and socket. So if you're going to do any of this, this is the design, the profile that I would suggest. If I just go back to that one. So you can see the water building up. They create sort of an impermeable barrier. They are keyed into the bank on the left-hand side and the right-hand side, and the pilings are driven in all the way down to solid peat underneath. So here we go. So this is Chris. So they're very simple to put in, with a caveat of if the ground is wet enough, if there aren't roots in place that you have to hit it through. Pretty straightforward. So these are the S or the Z profile. So it works pretty easily. They're pretty easy to put in. Again, with an excavator, this is a slightly larger one. This is on Delamere Forest. What's interesting to note is that with that rubber mallet, we can hit the piling harder than that excavator can hit it. So this is pushing it in and it stops. And now he's going to knock it in. So he's just going to, I'll move him in. So he's got it hitting it in the middle so it goes in straight and it will stop soon. And then from that point on, it's a big rubber hammer. And that's how to get it in. The excavator won't knock it in any more than what I could do with a big hammer. So the plastic piling, so we have the pros, they are straightforward to put in. They can be installed by hand, much less ground disturbance than if you need an excavator. You can therefore install them throughout the year because they're non-intrusive. They do not rot or rust. They're manufactured from recycled plastic. And they're resistant to the acidic ground conditions that we have on the peatlands. The cons, they can be expensive, they're heavy, they're unbelievably unwieldy. So depending on the depth of your drain that you are blocking, you may be using 1.5 meters or 2 meters in length. That any one person can carry 3, 4 maybe at a time, and they're slippy. And you're carrying them, and they're horrible to carry, they really are. So when you're planning your projects, getting them from a car park where they've been delivered to where you want to put your pilings, factor in that someone is going to have to take multiple sorties across, never flat or dry or easy walking ground conditions. You've got to take that into consideration. I'm 6 foot plus, 1.5 meters is okay, I can get those in. 2 meters I can at a push if I dig a bit of a trench first. Anything more than that, you're going to need an excavator. So they're good in small amounts because they're knackering to put in as well. They can also break or shatter, and that needs to be avoided at all costs. Trying to remove one of those pilings that is even in the ground a foot or 18 inches that's broken is just awful. It's just the suction of the peat, of the wet peat, trying to pull this slippy thing out that's ball and sockets are connected to the next one with wet hands in wet conditions. As you pull, you go lower and lower because you're in wet ground. So breaking them is not an option. You've really got to try and avoid breaking that because you will lose hours just trying to pull this thing out. They could be unsightly. They are plastic. They are plastic in the countryside. So you've got to take that into account. If you're doing multiple of them, then an excavator will be needed, which creates increased ground disturbance, which may limit the timings you're able to put them in due to nesting birds and other environmental factors. Underground drainage pipe blocking, I'll do this very quickly because I will run out of time. I would say about this that it's very simple. If you find a land drain underground, there's not a lot of nuance to this. You find it, you dig it up and you smash it in with a load of peat. There's not a lot to it. It's a very simple process. The difficulty is finding them when there's no evidence of where they're going to be on the ground. And then even more so, once you've found them, that you can work out where they are because they're generally 10 yards apart. It's trusting that you've got all of them. So land drains have been installed historically through the years by different generations of farmers, perhaps. You can have multiple land drain layers within a site. We did a site where we were putting in plastic pilings and we knew that it had been drained. We knew that there would be one, maybe there would be 2 layers of pipes within this field. As we were digging down to put the peat bunding in, we found 3 different layers of land drains. So we had the 4-inch clay pipes, we then had 4-inch clay reeded pipes, and then we had plastic pipes, all at different heights, all at different spacings across there. So knowing what you've got is the most difficult thing about doing this. So the pros, they're quick if you know where the pipe location is. It's simple, find the pipe, dig it out, fill it in. Excavator are useful if you've got multiple pipes and only a small machine is needed, so you've got a little bit more, you're not restricted by access if you're in sort of wooded areas. The cons, you've got to have the confidence of the location of where the pipes are. Excavator is needed, which increases ground disturbance. You may miss the lower drains if you're assuming that you've only found the ones on the top, and therefore it can be time restrictive due to nesting birds, for example. Peat bunding. How do we go about peat bunding? So these is pretty simple drawings of a peat bunding. Peat bunding is creating a wall of compacted peat underground, and it requires excavators, and it's digging down, finding all the drains, smashing all those up, and then again there's not a huge amount of nuances. It's pummeling the peat back into the trench that you've dug, pummeling and squashing and pummeling and squashing, and creating a solid wall of peat underground, which you then raise out of ground to your desired height to retain the water, whichever side it is. So this is a project that we did at Risley Moss. So this is Little Moss, and we created a network of 6 or 7 cells within there. So the left-hand side was November 22, and the right-hand side is November 23. So you can see on the slide on the left-hand side the slightly greener vegetation. This is the sphagnum in this area, and then you've got purple moorgrass all the way through there. Compared to 1 year later, the sphagnum is what we want, the wet ground is what we want, the purple moorgrass is what we don't want, and the contrast is quite stark in just 1 year. And what I'd like to just point on this one is that the smaller pond in the middle on the right-hand side, if we could just about see that, that is this pool here on the left-hand side. And that pond has arrived in the 5 days in between the 2 photos, just showing how much water is moving through these peatlands. And we've caught all that by installing these peat bunds, sorry. This is again another site. So this is what we started with. Add in a 13-ton excavator, and we can get to a series of cells that look something like that. So the pros of peat bunding, it's very effective at retaining the water. It blocks all the pipes that we will find within our trench. It can compartmentalise the site. The accurate water level within the site and within cells is achievable. We can create the outflow of our choice. We can direct the water to wherever we want the water to go. And if done properly, there's little remedial works. Oh dear, okay. Cons, slow and variable, 50 to 150 metres a day, labour intensive, a large excavator is needed. So how do you get a 13-ton excavator on and off a bog? That normal, that Christmas cracker question, carefully. What we can do, we can have wide steel tracks. Steel tracks they have got more grip than rubber tracks. Little point to note, if you stamp your heel on the ground pretty hard, that is approximately the same pressure an excavator has when trundling over ground. Approximately. It is amazing how much you can spread the weight by using trees and brash, bog mats, tree roots, things like that. Read the vegetation. Knowing what vegetation grows in the drier areas, knowing what will grow in the wetter areas will help. Use experienced drivers. Have experienced banks person. I will touch on this if I have time at the end. Quickly on wetland restoration, so we specifically lots of different techniques that we could use. One I just wanted to point on because it was a new one to us this last month, is to create laid trees, so trees that we keep intact and lay them across, creating woody debris dams. So anybody who knows a tree, if you try and fell a tree without putting a gob cut at the front, it will split up and will create a barber's chair, which is very, very dangerous. We had to avoid that because we wanted to keep the front of the tree all intact, so the cambium layer was good to go and the tree was going to grow. In order to do that, use rope. So wrap the rope around and around and around and around. So just normal nylon rope, wrap it around, and it stops the barber's chair, it stops the tree splitting amazingly. Don't ever tie the knot, because there'll be a lot of pressure when you put it down and you won't be able to undo the knot. But if you just wrap it round and loop it in on itself, it will stay and it will work a treat. Then with a big excavator, you can push it down and pop it into place. Bury it on one side, so we lay the trees upstream level, so as the flow comes down, any flow, the pressure would be pushing the trees back into the bank, and you're left with something that looks a little bit like that. So this was the trees were designed to be left above ground level, above water level, so the normal water flow went underneath. When water level rises, it gets slowed down, and then it backs up and goes into the wetland that was created around the side. And very briefly, very lastly, I just wanted to emphasise the point that something that I think is overlooked largely on a lot of projects, that the value of an experienced banks person, and that is as important as an experienced digger driver. A digger driver might be brilliant, but they cannot see what's going on there. They cannot see what's happening underneath the tracks, but the banks person can. And the value of a banks person should be higher in everybody's minds, I think. And that's it. Thank you very much. Sorry for going over.